At 61, Sandra Bullock breaks her silence about her marriage to Jesse James. What happened was worse than the rumors. At 61, Sandra Bullock had learned the art of stillness. It was not the kind of stillness that came from peace, but the kind that followed years of noise, applause, speculation, judgment, and silence mistaken for strength. Her life, once lived under relentless spotlights, had slowly folded inward. Fewer interviews, fewer red carpets, fewer explanations. And yet, the past never truly stays quiet. Some stories wait patiently, aging alongside us, until the moment they demand to be told. This was one of them. The question she had avoided for decades. The room was warm, softly lit, intentionally intimate. No flashing cameras, no audience, just a recorder placed gently between two cups of untouched tea. Sandra had agreed to this conversation under one condition: no interruptions, no sensational headlines forced into her mouth, and no pressure to be brave for anyone else. When the interviewer finally asked the question, it was almost apologetic. "Do you ever think about that marriage?" Sandra did not answer immediately. She had been asked versions of that question for over 20 years. Usually wrapped in curiosity, sometimes in cruelty, often in shallow fascination. She had always smiled politely, deflected gracefully, and moved on. This time, she didn't. "Yes," she said quietly. "More than people think." And with that single admission, something shifted. Love, before it becomes a trap. When Sandra first met Jesse James, she was exhausted, not physically, but emotionally. Years of public relationships, rumors, expectations. She wanted something raw, unpolished, far from Hollywood's perfection. He seemed real. Unfiltered, confident, dangerous in a way that felt grounding rather than threatening. He spoke without calculating his words. He didn't treat her like an icon. At first, that felt like freedom. "I mistook intensity for honesty," Sandra would later reflect. "And chaos for passion." Love arrived quickly, too quickly. It often does when loneliness has been waiting longer than it should. The subtle erosion. The worst stories are never dramatic at the beginning. There was no shouting, no bruises, no obvious villain. Instead, there were comments disguised as jokes. Control framed as concern. Isolation masked as protection. "Why do you need them? They don't really know you. I'm the only one who sees the real you." At first, Sandra listened. Not because she was weak, but because she wanted peace. The woman the world saw as confident, accomplished, unbreakable was quietly shrinking behind closed doors. Not all cages have locks. Some are built with words. Fame makes it harder to leave. People often ask why women stay. Sandra had asked herself the same question, long after the marriage ended. The answer wasn't fear. It was responsibility. Admitting failure in private is painful. Admitting it in public, when millions feel entitled to an explanation, is paralyzing. Leaving would not be quiet. Staying felt easier. And so she learned to compartmentalize. Public Sandra smiled. Private Sandra endured. The rumors were only the surface. When the marriage finally collapsed, the headlines exploded. Infidelity, betrayal, humiliation. The world consumed the scandal hungrily, convinced it understood the story. But Sandra knew the truth was far worse, and far less dramatic. "The rumors focused on what he did to me," she said years later. "But not on what I slowly did to myself trying to survive it." The real damage wasn't betrayal. It was erosion. The gradual loss of voice, of instinct, of self-trust. The part of her that once said "this doesn't feel right" had learned to whisper, and then went silent. The day everything fell apart. The end didn't come with closure. It came with exhaustion. Sandra remembered sitting alone in a room filled with expensive furniture, awards lining the shelves, silence pressing against her chest. I had everything, she said. And I had nothing. That was the moment she realized survival was no longer enough. She didn't leave dramatically. She left quietly. And for the first time in years, she felt fear and relief at the same time. After the marriage, the loneliest freedom. Freedom is rarely glamorous. In the months that followed, Sandra withdrew from the world. Not out of shame, but necessity. Healing required anonymity. She stopped performing strength. Stopped explaining. Stopped pretending she was fine. There were days I didn't recognize myself, she admitted. Not because I was broken, but because I was finally honest. Therapy wasn't cinematic. Growth wasn't linear. Some mornings she felt powerful. Others, impossibly small. But something important returned. Her voice. Why she stayed silent. For years, Sandra refused to speak publicly about the marriage. Not to protect him. To protect herself. Revisiting trauma for public consumption felt like reopening a wound for entertainment. I didn't owe anyone my pain, she said simply. At 61, however, the reason changed. Silence, she realized, could also become a burden. And stories untold had a way of poisoning future peace. The decision to speak. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about vindication. It was about clarity. I wanted women to understand something, Sandra said. You don't have to be destroyed to be damaged. And you don't have to be weak to be controlled. The interviewer listened carefully as Sandra chose her words, not as a victim, but as a witness to her own past. What happened, she said, was worse than the rumors. Because the rumors ended, the effects didn't. Healing is not a redemption arc. Hollywood loves transformation stories. Broken woman, public collapse, glorious comeback. Real healing is quieter. Sandra didn't become wiser overnight, or fearless, or immune to doubt. She simply became kinder to herself. She learned to sit with discomfort instead of explaining it away, to trust her instincts again, to choose solitude over chaos. Love, she realized, should not feel like survival. Looking back without hatred. When asked if she felt anger toward her former husband, Sandra paused. No, she said finally. Anger keeps you connected. I chose distance. That distance wasn't bitterness. It was boundaries. I don't need to rewrite the past to make myself the hero, she said. I just needed to stop making myself disappear. The legacy of the experience. The marriage did not define her. But it changed her. It taught her how easily strength can be misunderstood as invincibility, how success can mask suffering, how silence can look like grace. Most importantly, it taught her that leaving is not failure. Staying silent forever, she realized, might be. At 61, a different kind of power. Sandra Bullock no longer chased narratives. She let them go. Her voice, steady now, carried no urgency, no plea for understanding, no need for approval. This isn't a confession, she said near the end of the interview. It's context. Context, finally given to herself. The truth behind the shock. The truth wasn't shocking because it was scandalous. It was shocking because it was ordinary. A strong woman losing herself slowly. A relationship that didn't explode, but eroded. A public figure suffering quietly because the world assumed she was immune. At 61, Sandra Bullock didn't break her silence to relive pain. She broke it to release it. And in doing so, she reclaimed something more valuable than reputation. She reclaimed her narrative.